The question is that this House do now adjourn. Brian Mathew.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to open this debate on fire station closures and would like to begin by paying tribute to the bravery of firefighters across the country. I'll give way.
I'm obliged. I thank the honourable member for giving way and securing this debate and paying tribute to the bravery of firefighters. As the Member of Parliament for Glasgow East, I wish to pay tribute to the brave firefighters in Glasgow who risked their lives to battle the fire on Union Street this past week, preventing casualties and saving Glasgow Central Station. This fire is absolutely devastating for the people who made their livelihoods, who feed their families through working in that building, which has now collapsed. I wonder if the honourable gentleman shares my concern that in Scotland, under the SNP, 1,250 firefighter posts have been cut since 2013, and high-rise appliances, critical for tackling fires like the one in Glasgow on Sunday, have been slashed from 26 to 16, and 2 were in Glasgow, and both were unavailable, it is understood, on Sunday. I'm obliged.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I take the points on well, and I think we should all think of what happened in Glasgow. So thank you for raising that. I know that family members of firefighters from Wiltshire are here in the gallery today, and I thank them for coming. I know also of firefighters from Dorset and Wiltshire who would also like to have been here, but as on-call professionals, they are in their communities today, ensuring coverage is in place to mobilise if the call comes. We owe them all a debt of gratitude. I've met with firefighters at a number of fire stations in Wiltshire. They're dedicated local people, demonstrating real pride in place, protecting their area. They have genuine concern about what these proposals mean for fire safety in rural communities. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a consultation taking place on the closure of 8 fire stations across Dorset and Wiltshire. To put this in perspective, this is 8 engines supported by nearly 100 firefighting staff who keep communities like Bradford-on-Avon safe. The town's fire station has served for generations, and the consequences of its closure would be profound. This is echoed across all 8 stations listed for closure. These crews attended over 500 incidents per year, ranging from house fires to flood response, road traffic collisions to river rescues. And these are the emergencies that make the headlines, but the everyday call-outs are no less important to those in trouble. They include freeing trapped livestock, assisting vulnerable residents stuck in their homes, and ensuring partner agencies know about any safeguarding risks. These stations act as natural points of emergency response coordination for events we hope will never happen, but for which they must always be prepared. Beyond the communities these stations serve, the closures will have an impact on the whole Dorset and Wiltshire service. More than 60% of incidents that crews from the 8 stations attend are outside the station catchment area. My neighbouring Liberal Democrat friend and colleague, the member for Chippenham, has written to me to say that she shares the concerns of the fire service and the many residents across Wiltshire who are worried about the impact of these closures on our community. Last summer, firefighters from Bradford-on-Avon travelled 50 miles to tackle a large wildfire on Holt Heath in Dorset. The incident was a stark reminder of how our changing climate is adding to the burden on fire and rescue services. Wildfires, flooding and extreme weather are no longer once-in-a-generation events. They're becoming part of the operational norm. In spite of massive flooding during Storm Bert in my constituency, and indeed in this year in Devon, Cornwall and the East Midlands, fire services across the country receive no specific funding for flood responses. How can we therefore be contemplating such sweeping cuts to emergency response capacity and civil resilience when in fact more is required? Since my election, I've been in regular contact with Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service leadership, and they've told me about the increasingly challenging funding environment. Since the merger in 2016, the service has had to find savings of over £15 million, which has led to a 15% reduction in firefighter posts and the withdrawal of second engines from 5 stations. While no one disputes the need to focus on value for money, the service is already recognised as outstanding for efficiency by the Independent Inspectorate. The service's current operations are lean. Ongoing modernisation is keeping capabilities up to standard, but the obvious question looms of how any further cost pressures can be absorbed. The government's 3-year settlement has been welcomed to aid longer-term planning. Indeed, the Minister will be quick to point out that the government's 4.1% annual uplift over this period, by allowing the Fire Authority to raise council tax preset by £5 to offset the 19.5% decline in central government funding between 2026 and 2029. However, at the core of this settlement is the Treasury's assumption that the area's council tax base, which is driven by new housing development, will increase by 1.57% annually. This forecast contrasts sharply with the past 3 years of actual growth, which have averaged at just 1%. For the coming 2026 to 2027 financial year, the figure is now confirmed at 0.9%, far below the Treasury's projection, and it will remain as such for the following 2 years, and the result is a 1.27 million annual disparity. The government's been clear the multi-year settlement is intended to provide greater certainty for local authorities to take sustainable long-term decisions. The Treasury's 4.1% uplift for Dorset and Wiltshire is welcome. The service is not asking for special treatment. The request is that the means are available to achieve this funding uplift on the ground, not just in an optimistic Treasury model. Please.
I'm very grateful to my neighbour for allowing me to intervene briefly. He will know that our right honourable friend, the member for Salisbury, who's concerned about Wilton, has written to the Minister to request a meeting, and I did the same at Prime Minister's questions yesterday. I very much look forward to that meeting. Does he agree?
Order.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Dr Andrew Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does he agree with me that the issue here is easy to resolve? Because the conundrum that we're in is based upon an assessment by the Treasury, which he has described, which was over-optimistic through nobody's particular fault, but we can remedy this simply by allowing some flexibility in the precept, and that would deal with the issue that has faced our wonderful fire and rescue service, and I certainly join him in paying tribute to those wonderful people, particularly the volunteers who give freely of their time to keep our constituents safe.
I thank the right honourable member for his comments, and in fact I'm going to go into some details on that now. Members across the House will recognise that rural fire services face different cost pressures compared to urban ones, and I do not believe rurality is adequately addressed in the current or previous funding formulae. That is a debate we must continue, but in the face of closures this summer, an urgent solution is required to safeguard our community fire service. If the government is not prepared to review its central funding, the only option on the table, when the Treasury's assumptions are proven incorrect, are station closures or additional precept for flexibility for 27-28 financial year to address short-term funding pressures through local rather than additional central government funding. Dorset and Wiltshire's current precept is below the national average for standalone services, and a one-off correction would bridge the funding gap while keeping the precept in line with that of neighbouring services. In the consultation on closures, residents have been asked if they're willing to pay a little more for their fire and rescue service, and I would urge the Minister to study these responses and to act on them. I can find no recent precedent for such a large number of fire stations being closed in 1 year, and with them, the loss of so many frontline jobs. Once a station is closed and its site sold, there is very little chance that it will be reinstated. The hit to emergency response times and community resilience is essentially irreversible. For the average household, the fire precept amounts to less than £100 or £1.85 per week. For this, we receive what is arguably the most important insurance policy any of us can have, a well-funded, well-staffed and well-trained fire and rescue service, ready to respond when the worst happens. All 8 stations are staffed by on-call firefighters, individuals who put their communities first, ready to pause their job and family life at a moment's notice, putting themselves at risk to help keep us safe. To my mind, the question is simple. The Minister can do nothing, and the stations that have served our towns and villages for decades will close, or by allowing some adjustments and giving the authority the opportunity to raise the funding the government says our Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Service should get via the precept. These stations would thus remain open, providing the emergency response, civil resilience and capacity our communities will need in the years to come. Thank you.
Edward Morello.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Melksham and Devizes, for securing this important debate, and also to thank both him and the Minister for permission to speak in this debate. I am at danger of repeating many of the points that my colleague has already made, but they are important points, and this is an important issue. The proposals from Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service would see the closure of 8 on-call fire stations across Dorset and Wiltshire, including the stations of Charmouth and Maiden Newton in my constituency of West Dorset. I recognise that the decision about station closures ultimately sits with the Fire Authority and not the Minister. But when the pressure driving those decisions stems from central government funding settlements, it is only right that the government is held to account. If approved in the coming weeks, these closures would remove 16% of the service as fire stations and lead to a loss of 72 firefighters. For many villages and towns these stations serve, they are the closest responders, and their loss would change the resilience of emergency coverage across our rural communities. The proposed closures have understandably caused deep concern amongst my constituents. I have met with the Fire Chief Officer and the senior management, representative of the 2 firefighter unions and the station commanders at both Charmouth and Maiden Newton. I have also received a huge number of emails and letters from residents who are rightfully worried about what these changes will mean for their safety and for the safety of the many visitors that come to West Dorset each year. The firefighters who serve our communities do extraordinary work. The stations at Charmouth and Maiden Newton, as well as the 8 other stations, are staffed by on-call firefighters, people who live and work locally but are ready to leave their jobs and their families at a drop of a hat to respond to emergencies. They do so knowing they may be putting themselves in harm's way, and they do so to protect their neighbours. In West Dorset, they are often the first responders to road traffic collisions, particularly on dangerous rural roads like the A35. They respond to wildfires and heath fires during the summer months, which are becoming more and more frequent with temperature rises. They assist during flooding incidents, something that our communities have experienced repeatedly in recent years, most recently during Storm Chandra. Since the merger that created Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service in 2026, the service has had to find more than £15 million in savings and is under real financial pressure. It has already resulted in a 15% reduction in firefighter posts and the removal of second fire engines from 5 stations. Under the so-called long-term funding settlement offered by this government, the authority has a revenue budget deficit of £1.2 million in year 1, £1.5 million in year 2, £1.7 million in year 3. Frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do not think funding settlement is the correct phrase. The Minister will mention the Government's decision to allow fire authorities to raise council tax precept by £5 per year, which is said to produce an average of 4.1% annual increase. But, as has already been outlined, that does not tell the full story. Central government revenue support grant for Dorset and Wiltshire is projected to fall from 12.8 million in 2026 to 10.3 million by 28-29, a reduction of nearly 20% in 3 years. The fair funding model has to date removed about 1.8 million a year from the services budget. To put simply, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government expects fire services to make up the shortfall the Government has created through council tax increases. In theory, 73% of the fire service funding is made up by council tax, business rates make up 11%, and revenue support grants from central government only 16%. But the underlying assumptions do not work for our rural areas. Council tax revenue depends heavily on local population growth and housing development. In many rural areas, including Dorset, the tax base is growing far more slowly than Treasury assumptions suggest. Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service has already confirmed that its tax base growth is below the levels assumed in the funding settlement. At the same time, the services are facing rising costs that it cannot control, increases in employer national insurance contributions, higher fuel costs, especially true with the current conflict in the Middle East, higher energy bills and rising contract costs, further compounded by the fact that the funding model does not account for rurality. All of this leaves the service in an increasingly vulnerable financial position.
Will the honourable gentleman?
I will, of course.
Very grateful. I agree with absolutely everything he has to say. However, will he agree with me that the only practical way of getting Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service the funds that they need to prevent the closure of these 8 stations, including me in my constituency, is to allow for flexibility around the precept? Otherwise, sadly, they're going to close. The structural issues that he has cited, of course, need to be addressed, but they won't help in respect of the emergency that is now upon us.
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, and I fully accept that an increase in the precept would be one option available to the Government, but I would also like to challenge the Government on the underlying assumptions in Treasury funding models, not least with the forecast population growth, but also with the lack of rurality included in many of the funding models across the board, which, we're talking about fire services today, but I could talk to rurality and funding for Dorset Police or Dorset NHS or any number of areas. The fact is that rural Britain is repeatedly underserved when it comes to the Treasury funding model. The result is that stations like Charmouth are now being considered for closure, with neighbouring stations such as Lyme Regis expected to cover larger areas without any additional resources. If local stations close, travel distances will inevitably increase, which means longer response times for fires, road traffic collisions, flooding incidents and other emergencies. 60% of incidents that crews from the 8 at-risk stations attended are outside of the station catchment area. In critical, life-threatening situations, small delays will have consequences. This is particularly concerning in West Dorset, where the population increases by 42% during the summer months due to tourism. Our narrow country roads, the wider effect of rurality, seasonal visiting numbers, coastal geography all create travel difficulties not accounted for in the formula. Time and again, it is rural communities that end up paying the price. There is currently a consultation underway on the proposed closures, and I, like many, urge all of my residents to make sure their voices are heard. But the reality is that the service is being pushed towards these decisions by the financial framework it has to operate within. Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service has already lost 1/5 of its workforce since 2010. Removing another 16% of stations would push the service even further. I therefore ask the Government to look carefully at whether the current funding settlement for fire and rescue services properly reflects the needs of rural and coastal areas, and whether the current funding is undoing years of underfunding or in reality compounding it. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not hyperbole to say without proper funding we are putting people's lives at risk. I beg the Minister and the Treasury to meet with Dorset and Fire Service to review the underlying assumptions and reconsider this funding settlement.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Melksham and Devizes for raising this important issue and for setting out his concerns so clearly. I'd also like to acknowledge the firefighters who have attended today and welcome them to the Chamber. I'm mindful that this is an issue of significant concern to many, including those who've travelled here today and who feel passionate about this subject. The Honourable Member has quite understandably focused on proposals affecting his constituency, and I'll address the points he's raised, while noting there are, of course, as he acknowledges, limits to central government's involvement in local decisions. First, let me be clear. Public safety is and always will be the main priority for this government. I want to place on record the government's deep appreciation for the dedication, professionalism and courage shown every day by firefighters and the support staff who stand behind them. As the Honourable Member for Glasgow East has pointed out this afternoon, their work saves lives and provides reassurance to communities across the country, as demonstrated in the fire near Glasgow Central Station on Sunday, which shows how much we depend on the bravery and rapid response of firefighters to safeguard lives and provide reassurance in moments of real danger. Members will appreciate that decisions on how fire and rescue services are organised, including the numbers and locations of fire stations, appliance availability and crewing numbers, are not decisions for the government. I'm pleased that the Honourable Members recognise this and that they are rightly the responsibility of the local fire and rescue authority and its chief fire officer, who are best placed to assess local needs and demands. All FRAs have a statutory duty to produce a community risk management plan in which they set out the key challenges and risks facing their communities and how they intend to mitigate them. Decisions on fire and rescue resources, including how staff are best deployed and the location of fire stations, are matters for each FRA based on risks identified within local community risk management plans. Turning to fundings, after a decade of short-term settlements, 2026-27 marks a significant change, as Honourable Members have recognised. It delivers the first multi-year funding agreement for local government, providing councils and FRAs with the stability and certainty required to plan ahead and invest for the long term. Under this settlement, almost £1.95 billion in core spending power will be made available to standalone FRAs in England, excluding North Yorkshire and Greater Manchester. That represents an average increase of 4.71% on 2025-26 levels, rising to a total increase of 12.75% by the end of the multi-year settlement period. In addition, since the provisional settlement, an extra £15 million has been secured for fire and rescue services over the multi-year settlement. This ensures a minimum uplift of 3.8% in core spending power in 2026-27 for all standalone fire and rescue services, with some benefiting from increases of more than 7%. Yes, I will.
To the Minister. I welcome the multi-year settlement, and so does the Fire and Rescue Service. However, will she accept that one of the problems with it is the assumptions on which government support is based, that is to say the growth of council tax, has no opportunity to be tweaked up or down because we're looking at a longer settlement period than was previously the case, and that is precisely the problem that we face at the moment. And the solution that is being offered is the preset flexibility that will allow that to be resolved and therefore keep our fire and rescue, our fire stations open. So in a sense, what we're talking about is an artefact, an unintended one, of the multi-year settlement that needs to be resolved.
Thank you to the Right Honourable Gentleman for his points. I look forward to discussing them with him further, as I'm no doubt going to be representing the Prime Minister in our meeting. What I would say is that in line with usual practice and in recognition of the views raised, the Government will continue to keep its methodology under review when it's calculating the core spending power of local government for future years. So I will look forward to discussing it with him further. And I note the comments of members here today. The Honourable Member raises the issue of funding pressures, and as he's pointed out, Dorset and Wiltshire FRA will have access to £79.5 million in core spending power in 26-27, as recognised, a 4.1% increase compared to 25-26. This does strengthen the FRA's ability to plan, invest and deliver for the communities it serves. While the Government sets the funding framework, decisions on how best to deploy these resources to meet core responsibilities does remain the responsibility of the FRA, ensuring a locally led response to local risk. I also want to pay particular tribute to our on-call firefighters, individuals who balance everyday lives, jobs, families, responsibilities with exceptional commitment of responding to emergencies. Whether attending a fire in a rural village or a major incident in a city centre, their readiness and bravery command the respect of the whole House. In many rural areas, on-call firefighters are not just important, they're indispensable. These communities rely heavily on their presence, and I recognise their local knowledge and ability to respond rapidly. I firmly believe that the on-call model is invaluable to the communities that it serves. While the Government recognises the challenges for services for whom on-call is integral to their operating model, with innovative and strategic thinking, it can work and offer real resilience within fire services. With sustained collaboration between Government, fire and rescue services and fire and rescue authorities, there's a real opportunity to strengthen and revitalise the on-call workforce as part of a wider workforce strategy that sees on-call treated and respected as the professionals that they truly are. To support that work, the National Fire Chiefs Council has published detailed research into the sustainability of the retained duty system. This work's been shared with FRAs to inform future planning, improvement activity and local workforce strategies. The Government continues to engage closely with the sector on this really important issue. More broadly, the Government remains committed to a reform agenda, one that supports the sector to evolve, professionalise and thrive. I'm encouraged by the work of the Ministerial Advisory Group for Fire and Rescue Reform, which has brought together a wide range of voices to identify good practice and remove barriers to progress. I do, however, recognise that the funding formula, as it stands, is out of date. We are working on reforming this for the next spending review period. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, operational decisions must rightly remain with local FRAs. I note that the Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Authority, on which the Honourable Member's party holds the majority, are consulting on these proposals. The consultation runs until the 15th of May, so I would encourage all residents affected, firefighters and stakeholders to participate. Meanwhile, this Government will continue to support the sector with stable funding, a clear framework for reform, both in terms of the role of the firefighter, the role of FRAs, and also in funding, as well as an unwavering commitment to public safety. We will stand with firefighters as they continue to protect our communities with professionalism and courage. I thank the Honourable Member once again for raising these important issues and look forward to working with members across the House to ensure our fire and rescue services remain resilient, responsive and equipped for the challenges ahead. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.